Hello there. I am Dr. Jill Wener. I am a meditation and tapping instructor and teacher, and geeking out big time right now because of my guest today. So I can't even think. But I am a white woman, obviously, who has been doing the internal and external work to help myself and other white people learn more about racism, and to try to dismantle systemic racism. And I've been doing this series of interviews, and I am just super, super excited to have Crystal McCreary here with me. I've been following her on Instagram forever, and it's just really funny. I'm like, I need to interview her. So Crystal is amazing. She studied at Stanford. She's has training in, she's a teacher, a dancer, an actor. She has her 500-hour yoga teacher training. She's a yoga and mindfulness educator and a health educator at a private school in New York. She leads retreats. She's on the faculty of health and wellness at that school. And she's also on the diversity inclusion committee at the Yoga Alliance. And so many other things. And anyway, Crystal, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your time. I mean, right now, just for anyone listening in the future, this is June 11th. We're in the heat of all of the fallout from George Floyd and everything else that's been going on recently. And Crystal's been kind enough to take an hour out of her day to talk with me and to share her thoughts on racism and spirituality. And I'm going to be quiet now. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill. Yeah, it's an honor to be here and be engaging in conversations in a way that is very visible, and sort of demonstrating how these uncomfortable conversations can be had skillfully. Mm-hmm. I do believe that, you've already tied the relationship between spirituality and issues that are uncomfortable, like racism. And I believe that spiritual practice, and there's a variety of them, and you can decode that word spiritual in any number of ways. And I sort of encourage people, I always encourage my students to decode it in the way that supports them best. But I do believe that these tools are the missing piece, right? In terms of like what we shift about how we actually dismantle and disarm a very, very harmful racist world that we're all trying to thrive in, which is not possible when it's present. So I'm very, I'm happy to be having this conversation, and I'm happy to be having it with you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So, okay. So I think I'd like to let's start with your blog post that you just did. I think you posted last week or earlier this week about racism and spirituality. And you mentioned that racism is I'm quoting you. I hope that feels like kind of fun. It's a social agreement designed to break us. So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so racism, first of all, it's not real, right? I mean, it's very real because we've all agreed to participating in the way that it's constructed. But it's based on a fallacy, right? It's based on this idea that one group of people has more value than another based on the color of their skin. And clearly that is absolutely ludicrous, right? Like if you are a critically thinking human being, right? And you have a brain, like if you just have a brain, you don't have to necessarily like be able to think critically. Like there's so much evidence to the contrary, and we are all born, like the difference between a human being with brown skin versus a human being, a non-melanated human being, there's like the tiniest little microscopic fraction of a biological cellular difference, right? So it's just not true. And yet, it is a way that we are all maneuvering in a world, and it's based on a hierarchy, right? And when you consider that racism causes harm on a emotional level, right? It causes harm to, mental health. It causes harm to our bodies, right? As we're seeing very clearly with all, just the instances of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, just in the last few weeks, and more, because there have been more instances of racialized, state-sanctioned racialized murder. That is, these are all examples of it affecting literally our bodies, right? And there is a dimension of us that cannot be touched, that is not physical, that I would say, there's a spiritual dimension. You can call it your intuition, you could say it your higher power. I mean, you again, decode the word the way you want. But when our bodies pass away, right, what animated them, right, our life force is something, right, that's beyond those sort of three categories I just named, right, that I'm going to call spiritual for our purposes. And so racism works on all those levels of us, right, and it disconnects us from the wholeness, right, the inherent wholeness that is our inherent birthright. And so when I say breaks us, literally, I mean like the individual, but it also disconnects us from each other, right? Is it really possible, if we're all broken, right, to really connect and feel like we can love one another or be one with one another if there's always this perceived disconnect of the other human being's value, right, based on skin color, right? So it also clearly has broken, right, when you consider how our systems, right, the other systems that we operate inside of, right? Racism has an impact on healthcare, right? If you are a Black or brown person and that has been redlined and the access that you have to basic human resources, is not available, or you are someone who's, dependent on the, welfare system, or you are someone who's, stuck in an education system that is not, is not fully resourced, right? These are all resources that we require as human beings, but based on the color of your skin, where you live, the variety of factors that impact a person's lived experience, based on race, right? You can be completely disconnected from your wholeness, what you require to be a whole human being needs. And that's what I mean when I say it's designed to break us, right? It literally fragments our ability to connect with ourselves, with others, and frankly, with what's happening around us, right? And so, one of one of the things you mentioned just before we started was, an experience that I think many people who operate in spiritual, settings have observed, which is, many spiritual settings kind of have this baseline understanding, this foundational, sort of tenet belief that we're all one, right? And we are, it's like when we were little, the delight we brought to everything, like, the way that the world was full of wonder, right? Like that sense that like, I'm perfect, it's all good, let's play, let's have fun. Like we have that wiring in us. And over time, the older we get, the more we operate inside these systems, the more we're told and we absorb these ideas of like, this person has more value than that person, and this experience is better than that. And if you don't have this, then you're not worthy or you're less valuable, right? All of those things are like practical, temporal, experiential, real. They're part of our reality, right? And yes, while we might be one, right, we definitely have this capacity to like connect with that part of ourselves that's like super, super untainted, for lack of a better way of expressing it. We, by only focusing on that part of ourselves, we're denying the actual lived reality, right? We call this spiritual bypassing, right? We're denying the fact that yes, we might be spiritual beings, but we're having a human experience. And this human experience has been designed by other humans who didn't necessarily design it very skillfully. And they didn't, you know, ensure that the way that we're organized is around principles that support life, love, right? That actually support oneness. If we did, right? If we lived in a human positive, or a like if we were organized around principles like, yeah, life instead of, let's say, capital, right, or race, then yeah, you know, we might actually just be able to all sit around the yoga studio in a circle and meditate, and it'd be all good. But we don't live inside that way, right? We actually live in a world with a lot of agreements that are in place that make it really hard for most people to actually feel like they're one, and move through the world with that, directed by that principle of oneness.
That's so beautiful. And the spiritual bypassing, I mean, we were talking about this before we started recording. In my own community, I've found myself quite frustrated by older white men leading as often happens in a spiritual movement, or spiritual community, and talking about these things, but not at all acknowledging, like talking in flowery language about what to do with anger and what to do with like perceived helplessness and perceived this and perceived that. And I'm like, who are you talking to here? Are you talking to the ignorant white people, or are you talking to the people of color who are like, I can't tell who you're suggesting needs to get a sense of the impermanence of all of it. And I want to be able to tell explicitly who you're talking to, and let's get more concrete about it, and not bypass it and not deny what's actually happening. And I just find myself so frustrated and feeling like I'm not serving the people I'm supposed to be serving. I'm not doing anyone any favors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, the question for me, you know, in light of what you just said is, you know, what makes it hard for these white men, these who are leaders and, you know, facilitators of these practices? Why is it that they can't see what they're, the harm that suggesting that ability, or that capacity to people who are not like them, right? To women, or to, you know, Black and brown people, or, you know, disabled people, you know, or mentally, people with mental illness, or trans bodies and populations. Like, why do you think they can't? That's the question. It's like, why can't they see why that's not relevant to those people? Right? And the answer has to do with the fact that, again, it's about this hierarchy, right? This racial hierarchy. And they're at the top, or they're at the center, right? And their experience and their worldview and their perception of reality is always centered, right? And so their ability, it's like, we can't change what we can't see. But guess what? If you don't change where you stand along the circle, if you don't put someone else in the center or put someone else on the top, you can't see, right? It's impossible to change, right? And so the fact that we don't, as a larger society, demand and hold accountable the fact that, you know, everybody's experience has value. And we need to center and bring the perceptions and the experiences of people who have been on the margins, outside the circle even, right, into the center. You know, and what would that look like? Mm-hmm. You know, what would it look like for, you know, I just had an experience recently where, you know, one of my colleagues who invited me to be a part of a training, a mindfulness training for educators, you know, he was very alarmed when he was approached to be a part of this, because as a white male, you know, he was looking at the other facilitators who was part of this program, and he's like, oh my God, this is all white men teaching mindfulness to educators, most of whom are women, mm-hmm. and, you know, who are going to go out into, you know, public school settings, not teaching, you know, white children. So, you know, he was like, this is a problem that the only people who will be visible as the experts of this mindfulness practice are white men, right? And so he said that to the, you know, the people who were, you know, administratively and, you know, in control of this course. And he said, he gave him a list of people he wanted. He said, I really, I worked with this woman, Crystal, and she's wonderful. And we've done this before together. I would really like her to be here, but I want you to know it's a problem that, you're not, it hasn't occurred to you to bring in other voices. There are lots of people who are, facilitating these practices, and it's important to get the lens of experience from a variety of, diverse mindfulness professionals. And, he said that to this man. And, the man, like, it's like he couldn't even process it, right? It's the same thing that you're saying. It's like he couldn't really get, he's like, well, what's the difference? I have all these great people. They're experts at what they do. It's like, so it's again, like there's this, so I had that experience personally, recently where, it's just the not being able to see, right? And so in order to see, we do need to make active choices about doing things differently. Intentional, conscious, mindful choices where we do things differently. And it's hard, again, this is why, corporate boards and like, the leadership in, all kinds of organizations, right, need to have diverse representation so that there are lots of voices in the room, and not just in the room, but like they're being included in like, what does our programming look like? What structures do we have in place? Who are we, who is the population that we're going to serve, and what are their needs, right? So that there's multiple lenses supporting, a more, instead of a hierarchical, right, sort of way of discussing and being around these topics, there's more of it's a circle, and we're kind of all, we're all contributing, and we can have one person highlighted in the center and then bring in the next person. And it doesn't always have to be the same person, same sort of white, male, Western, cis normative
right
viewpoint.
Yeah. And in my spiritual community, it's all of those things, plus the one who marries young women and has many children with them, and all the things. Yeah.
Listen. Yeah.
So yes, all of it is so, okay. I have so many things I want to ask you about. I want to talk about the whiteness of yoga, maybe, like how it's been it obviously comes from India. Mm-hmm. It has sort of, I am not an originator of yoga in America, like I'm a late, I can't claim any originality in terms of yoga at all. But what has your experience been as a Black woman in the yoga space, in your training, in your getting yourself out there to the world? What are some, because I'll give an example of my yoga studio that I love, had and this just kills me to even talk about, a sign for a hip hop yoga class. All the teachers there are white. 95% of the people who practice there are white. And it was a picture of the two white teachers wearing sunglasses and like standing like that, back to back. Ooh. And I saw it, and I was like, I don't like this. Like, I don't like this. And I spoke up to one of the teachers at the desk, and I said, I don't like it. It's like appropriation. It's bad. And she was like, I know. She goes, but I'm not going to say anything to the owner. And I was like, okay. And I walked away. And then I was like, wait a minute. No. And then I like came back. It's this like happy white space, but then there's all this stuff underneath it that's ugly. And I spoke up, and I had to go speak up again to be heard. And I don't even know if anything was passed on. And I don't even know why I didn't email the owner directly, except I don't have her email, and I probably should have. And, but it's just something now that I'm looking back on. Yeah. Through the lens of that story or your own experiences, like tell me what that's been.
Well, I think that's an important thing to have mentioned as a white woman who's in mostly white yoga spaces, because I think, when people don't speak up about those things, right, then you become complicit in the perpetuation of more racism and more racist violence, right? These weapons of race, this is an example of a weapon of racism, right? And it's like not necessarily like physical violence, but it is, right? And so in that instance, like that's where you can play the role of an ally and explain why that upset you. And the thing is, like, here's the thing about most white people who are well-meaning and understand that there's a thing called racism and that it's at work, is that, like, they they have these gut instincts, right? That like, something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the prospect of having to be uncomfortable, have an uncomfortable conversation, or maybe hurt someone's feelings, or make someone else uncomfortable, you know, is like, let me back away. I don't know how to, you know, I don't want to do that, right? And so here's the thing about spiritual work, right? It's like, that's where you draw on your practice, you know, especially yoga, right? Because yoga teaches us how to hold the tension of the discomfort, right? When you're in warrior 2 for 10 breaths or whatever it is, and your thigh is burning, that's you growing your capacity for discomfort. And what does your teacher tell you when you're in that warrior 2 for 5 breaths, 8 breaths, 10 breaths on a day you just took a run and your thighs were burning before you even got into the class or whatever it was? Like, the yoga teacher's saying, breathe, focus on your breath, soften your gaze, right? The yoga teacher is giving you the tools to help you hold the discomfort. So if you are a well-meaning white yoga person and your studio is appropriating, you know, yoga and all the other things, appropriating Black culture, you know, like hip hop and Black music and, you know, in yoga itself from India, if your instinct is, I need to say something about this. Because the thing is, you know, people who are impacted most directly by racism didn't create it, right? So if we're gonna really dismantle it, it's gotta come from white people, right? I mean, because you benefit from it in a way that, like, if y'all aren't dismantling, it ain't gonna get dismantled, right? Because, you know, we live in a culture that's like all about comfort and all about pleasure, and we lack the tools for like how to be with the other part of life, which is a very real part of life. Like, we're deluding ourselves to think that like life should only be about, you know, the good stuff. No, life is, you know, and it's a problem when we don't have the tools to manage these moments. But as a yoga person, you're getting those tools. And that's the point, right? It's not just about being able to do warrior 2 for 10 breaths if you have to. It's literally about like, how do I bring this skill into my life and how I act and how I speak with others? So, you know, that is the union, right? Yoga means to yoke, to bring together, to unify, to connect. That is how you connect this incredibly empowering, embodied, you know, emotionally supportive, mentally supportive, spiritually supportive practice into your practical lived life. That is the point of yoga. And it's just like, for me, it's like, oh my God, why are all these people not getting it? But like, that's the moment, right? And that's the charge. That's what I'm charging all my quote unquote white allies, you know, all my quote unquote liberal, progressive, you know, anti-racist white friends and colleagues and all the other folks, whatever. But that's the charge, right? Because we, brown people, Black people, we've been screaming this stuff from the rooftops for hundreds of years. You know, and there has not been a lot of listening, hence the uprisings that we're seeing right now all over the world. So, you know, that's your job. Like, that is your job, you know, particularly if you think that you are, if you're trying to embody a practice. Otherwise, the practice is just performative. It's just masturbation, you know? And it's, for me, like, I'm really passionate about this because I do feel like this is a golden opportunity for people who've been practicing these practices to literally just, oh my gosh, like, make the connection. This is not just about my yoga mat or my meditation cushion. This is about how I live in the world, how I connect in the world, how I connect myself to everyone in my community, not just people in my community who already think like me and talk like me and dress like me and eat the same food I eat. No. It's how do we connect with everybody, right? Everybody.
It's so, and my work in this anti-racist space is that work. It's the, like, I have a curriculum. It's like, how to identify, how to feel in your body, how to feel negative things in your body, and then how to, like, learning about symptoms of white supremacy culture, and then recognizing how those make you feel and the defensiveness. And I've done so much work and using tapping and using, you know, all these different things. And I still effing had to tell this woman twice, because this was at least 6 months ago that this happened, which is a spark of a time in the big picture. Obviously, like, it's just because it was 6 months ago and it wasn't yesterday doesn't make me any less complicit. But it's like, I know those things, and it's still so freaking hard to do, because I knew the woman behind the desk, and it's like seeing that and knowing that that's so ridiculous. And so looking back, I mean, I'm writing about it now. And it came up to me, and I was like, how did I just say okay and walk away? Like, how in any world was that okay? It's obviously not, but it just, and trying to get white people to engage in the work that I'm doing, as the person who understands the bigger concept, trying to embody that over and over again is challenging.
Exhausting? Exhausting?
Yeah.
Welcome to that. Welcome to our world. If it's exhausting for you, imagine living in the skin, a body with different colored skin, right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing. That's what white supremacy robs y'all of, right? White people of. It robs you of connecting with your deepest capacity for resilience. If shying away from a conversation is like an uncomfortable conversation is the thing that makes you, go like, ooh, good luck. I mean, like, you know what I'm saying? But like, that to me is like, kind of, I mean, if I'm really honest, like, I feel like it's a little pathetic, right? Because it's like, there's so much capacity for all of us, right? We're so strong. We have the capacity for having courageous conversations, and the thing about resiliency is that you don't build it if you don't face adversity, right? So, one of my favorite poems is that Maya Angelou poem, and still I rise, right? It's like, look at this look at our world population. If you look at, like, atrocities committed against Black and brown people, how it's like we're still moving and shaking, and we're still living our best lives, or aiming to, right? We still have these extraordinary examples of not even resiliency, right? Post-traumatic growth, right? People who excelled beyond their initial capacity because they were actually strengthened, right? By that experience of adversity. So you miss an opportunity to actually grow into your fullest potential as a human being. That's what white supremacy robs y'all of, right? So get up on it, like, just do it. And the other thing is, I can't remember who said it first, because I've heard it a few times now, but one of my favorite reminders, right, connected to this is, when you lean into your discomfort, you're creating a space for someone to have more ease, right? So if you consider the suffering, the collective suffering of, Black and brown people, Black, brown, indigenous people, right? Every time a white person who's had the privilege of comfort and access that we haven't had, every time you step into that discomfort, you're literally creating space and breath for one of us to breathe and to feel comfort. Because I'm going to tell you, for us, we're living in in like a state of some degree of, like, low grade to high grade anxiety every moment of every day, right? We don't have the privilege of comfort when we're trying to figure out how to operate in this system of racism, where every step we take, it's like, oh, there's racism again. There's racism. We don't get to check out ever, right? So, like, for me, it's like, get it together, like, figure it out. Like, that's what I have to say about that. Like, that, because that ain't good enough, and the thing too is, like, again, y'all are missing out. You're not connected to your wholeness either. You're not whole. And, like, and if we're really honest, and this is where the practice, meditation, yoga, right, the mindful awareness, when you really sit with yourself in those quiet moments, the reality of your experience makes itself very well known. And when you get in that quiet space, you will hear and feel and know that your wholeness is connected to our wholeness. If we are not well, you're not either, right? So it's like, you know, this imagine if we all felt whole, right? And the thing about this world that we're in, again, this Western sort of world, we're organized around capital and material things. Like, it's easy to convince yourself, I'm good. I've checked all the boxes. I'm middle class. I got 2.5 kids. I got a house. I got a husband. I got all the things. And so I'm happy. I'm good. And, are you really good if every time something uncomfortable, like the news comes on and shows yet another Black man getting killed by the police, like, and you can't stand it or even watch it, so you turn, like, that's you having to live with your incompleteness, and there's like, yeah, you can try to deny it, but like, when we get in those really quiet spaces with ourselves, you know what happens when you meditate? All the stuff that you've been resisting or pushing down or that hasn't been addressed, it rises to the top, and it's only when you allow it to rise that you can meet it and take care of it and heal it and release it and truly become free and whole. And when you're really free and whole, you know what you want most? You want everybody else to be free and whole, because it ain't fun on the top if everybody else can't be there to play and party with you. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the thing. It's like, when I'm feeling good, like, I want to share it with everybody. When I was a kid, my dad, like, I would always read books or do things, that were like, anytime I did something that really lit me up, I would just run around and be like, oh my God, I got to share this with Melissa. Oh, I got to share this with Krishan. Like, everybody, I just want to share with everybody. Right? Because it's like, that's the spirit. That's how you know that you are connecting to your own liberation, right? Because you recognize, I'm not actually free unless we're all free. Let's give it, and the funny thing is, my dad's response to that was always, sit your butt down, read the book, and he'd be like, embody the book, be the book.
Yeah.
Be all the things the book said. And he was like, then you won't have to sell it to your friends. You won't have to, like, convince them to get it. Like, they will be like, what are you up to? And that's, what that's like. Those people who are just radiant and, who are inspiring, and that are connected to something, right? Yeah. They usually, one, have spiritual practice, right? And that spiritual practice connects them to something. Like, when I say spiritual, in this case, I'm thinking like an embodied, right, or contemplative exploration, right? And all the great leaders and teachers, particularly of movements, right, that have shifted our world, had a contemplative practice, a deeply contemplative practice. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, these people, who were game changers and who we look up to, right? That they use their practice and they recognize, this is really healing me, but if I don't, if I'm not embodying it, like Martin Luther King, do you know how many people have said similar words to his? But he embodied it. Yeah. And that's why he was the leader he was, right? And so that's what I'm interested in. It's like, can we please, like, remember who we are? Yeah. And, we all have these values and we give lip service to these ideas, but, we're not embodying it. We're not being the values of love and respect. And the love one always trips me up, because we're literally hardwired to require it, right? And we miss how to actually be love in the world every day by operating inside this system and then pretending it doesn't work. I mean, pretending that it does work, right? Operating inside this broken system that's breaking us, and then pretending like, oh, everything is, no, we ain't loving nobody. That's not love. You know, how can you sit next to the person you're, you know, on the bus or the subway, you know, comfortably, right? You know, when they are someone who's mentally ill, you know, and unwell, you can't, because you recognize, oh, you know what, like there's something in you that feels really uncomfortable because you know it's not right, right? And we do that all the time, you know, and so it's like this weird thing where it's like, oh, you know, I love my family, I love my friends, but I don't love you. That's not really love though, right? And so these tools, in my view, these spiritual tools are literally the technology for how to be these things in the world. But we got to use them that way.
I like how you call it technology. And when I was reading your blog post, I think you mentioned that in there. And I was like,
Yeah.
now I like really, really understand using that as technology. Yeah. I mean, I think it's beautiful. And
let's give credit where credit is due, because that's how technology is not 100 years old. It's thousands of years
right,
old.
right. Yeah.
You know, and it was made by, guess who? Brown people, right? I mean, not that all embodied practice is like, oh, it doesn't all, I mean, I feel like, or not embodied, but contemplative practice. There's many contemplative traditions from all over the world, you know, but the ones that, you know, we're largely talking about are, you know, they're ancient, but there's so much wisdom in them, right? And we often forget to acknowledge that, yes, actually this came from India, right? Or this came from China. This came from people who were of color, you know. So that's important too.
Absolutely. And I think I love what you're saying about the discomfort, because you can't just like poof say I'm anti-racist and then you're anti-racist. It's a constant challenging of the indoctrination that we've been breathing and drinking and eating and smelling our whole lives, that's been put out to us. And sending out a little email that you want to take step, like that's cool, that's a start, but doing the work to be uncomfortable. And there's lots of times where I succeed and there's lots of times where I don't. And I do, as you're saying, it's like, I recognize this is the very beginning of my activism in this way, you know, and this is nothing compared to nothing, like nothing, not even a speck of a speck compared to what people of color have been through and been trying to speak out and meeting the resistance and having people shut down. And I'm recognizing that the unsafety of it for me is not really unsafe at all. It's just people might unfollow me or think that I'm full of myself or whatever.
Yeah, that was another lesson I learned from an early age from my father. You know, because of course kids, especially in adolescence, you know, they're like, belonging, I need to belong, I need my peers to love me, and I need to, you know, I got to do the right thing and say the right thing, because that how our peers perceive us is so important. But I was always so afraid of like alienating my peers or like not being liked, you know. And my dad would say things like, you know, you'll always know a lot of people, Crystal, because that's just who you are, but you'll be lucky enough to get through life with one true friend, you know? And like, you know, it was like, oh yeah, that's true. I've had so many people come and go, and you kind of see that. It's like, you know, the inner circle is inner for a reason, right? Like there aren't a lot of people usually inside of it. So I think when we kind of release this idea that like somehow we're going to be the best of friends with everybody, or that it's a requirement to get through life is to like be liked, it's not a requirement, right? Like if you release that, you know, because I'd rather be respected than liked. You know what I mean? Like if you don't like me, that's okay. I don't need you to like me. Like what does that do for me? You know, but you know, because if you don't like me because I make you uncomfortable because what I'm saying is truthful, right? The truth of my words or my experience makes you uncomfortable, and you don't like me for it, well, keep it moving. You know, rejection is protection. Like rejection is protection. Like, so, you know, but that said, you know, I do think that we do as human beings, we know the truth when we hear it, right? And so again, like the truth, even if it's uncomfortable, it resonates. And that's what is most important, right? Like, is like, am I speaking my truth? Am I speaking what's true and compassionate and right, or best for all, right? If you're doing that and you lose those followers, or, you
Right.
know, those people who you thought were your friends, like, it's like, they weren't really your friends in the first place. So, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Now it's even clearer. It's better, you know, it's better.
Yeah.
In my view.
I totally agree. And I love everything about everything that you're saying and the way that you say it. And, you know, I find myself being like, is she saying you to me or you to white people? And I'm like, it's all the same. Like, if I'm feeling a little defensive right now because I didn't speak up enough at my, like, I deserve to feel defensive and I need to sit with that. I love it. I love everything you're saying and how you're speaking up. And you're so wise, and the way you are bringing the spiritual practice into everyday life, that's in this beautifully unapologetic way, is just so, like, so needed and so revitalizing. Can you tell me about what work you do? It looks like the retreats you do are for people of color.
I do a lot of retreats. I mean, well, not lately.
About that before, yeah. You're
Not
supposed
for
to be
a
in Costa
while.
Rica on Saturday.
Yeah, you know, I do all kinds of retreats. You know, some are, and they'll always say, hey, this is for, you know, Black, Indigenous people of color, or this is for women of color, you know. But, you know, like my Costa Rica retreat, the one that I'd be leaving on in 2 days, is for everybody, right? So, and the reason I do retreats for that center, right, the experiences of Black women, or women of color, or, you know, Black, Indigenous people of color, is because, you know, when we, because of the reasons we've already talked about, when we often go into these healing spaces, often the presence of non-Black people, right, has caused harm.
Yeah.
And we do need spaces, right? We need affinity spaces where we can actually go feel like we can actually heal. It's hard to heal if you're being re-hurt all over again, right? Reharmed. So, you know, we do need spaces where we feel safe to speak our truths and not have to explain our experience to someone who's, you know, not a person of color and doesn't understand. Like, that heavy lift is what we want to relieve, you know, relieve them of the burden of when we do those. And I usually, you know, facilitate, like I have one that I do every year with my friend Marla Teolia. And, you know, that's really important to us, you know, having the presence of a white person, even if they're well-meaning and they haven't even said anything, right? It has an impact often for people of color, of like, oh, I can't be my whole fullest self again because of that, the way that racism breaks us, right? We're afraid to use our voice, you know, in an authentic way. For an example, we might be, if when we've done it in the presence of white people in the past and been, you know, had our what we said edited, or told it was not correct, or that we didn't have a right to feel that, or whatever it was. Like, so creating spaces for us to feel safe, to heal, right? Because we can't heal if we don't feel safe, right?
Yeah.
If our fight flight mode is, you know, is kicked in and activated, it's very hard, you know, then our rest and digest mode is not on, right? And that's where all the healing and the optimal health is that's when it's happening, when we feel safe.
I think it's important for white people to recognize that too. I'm part of a neighborhood anti-racism book group. We're reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, and that we started like a year ago. And when we first started, it was diverse. And we were like making our rules, and we were like, we're going to make it a safe space. And one of the Black women spoke up, and she's like, I don't ever feel safe unless I'm only around other Black people. And that stuck with me so much. And I don't know I think white people tend to get very offended by like, oh, you're doing that just for people of color, or oh, you're just doing that for women or whatever, and not recognizing how important and necessary that is. And it's the opposite of racist. Like, it's, you know, people just don't sometimes miss that whole point. But that stuck with me. Like, I can say this is a safe space for you, but like, I don't have the right to say that. I don't have I can think I have the right to say that, and that's me telling that person that they should feel safe around me, but that's
Yeah,
very clearly not true, you know?
right. Well, and also, here's where the work of the white ally is again, right? Like, if you are saying that this is a safe space for people of color, you have to do the work and take action to ensure that it is.
Yeah.
I've been in a lot of white spaces where I feel safe. Not every white space I'm in is a space that I feel unsafe, but skillful facilitators, skillful educators, right? Skillful spiritual leaders or practitioners will have those explicit conversations about how we need to show up in this space for one another, what is going to be accepted, what's not. And it should be a co-generative conversation, right? Because we don't know what makes one person feel unsafe versus another, right? So all the voices in the room should always be a part of co-creating that safe space, or that brave space is what, I prefer to call it, because it's impossible. But it's impossible to guarantee, right, that every single person feels safe all the time, because you just don't know.
Yeah.
But you don't know about everybody's experience. It's impossible. So the goal is, can you show up in this space? And if you feel uncomfortable, can we create a safe enough space where you feel courageous enough to share your truth about what has just happened to make you feel unsafe? Now, if you're a white facilitator and you're trying to do that, you got to know what you're doing, right? And most educators or white yoga, whatever, I mean, we're talking about a yoga studio here, but most are not doing that, right? They're not actually having the conversation and saying, what do you need to feel brave? What do we need? How do we need to show up for you and in this space for one another so that everyone feels brave, right? And you'll be surprised at what people say. Sometimes it's like really obvious, like, we just need to be kind to each other. Or, and other times it's like, I need to know that if someone says something that causes harm, that they're going to actively repair it. They're going to do the work of repairing, right? Yeah. Like, hello, that's how we hold each other accountable. Because it's hard to be in community. It's hard. Even if you're in a community with everybody that you know and love, and that they seem to, like, a relationship is a community between two people. Relationships are hard, right? So, we have to be willing to have do the repair, right? Do the acknowledgement and the repair, and make the requests for what we need. And so you can, like, that's where, again, that's a charge to, white spiritual people, who are aiming to create brave spaces where some of these things can come up for people of color and whites who are in a community together. That's one of the things that you can learn to do. How do I support all the views and experiences of this room feeling like they belong here? How do I make a space where everyone knows that they belong? Whose experiences do I need to center and take from the margins and put them in the center? Whose do I need to maybe they need to talk less. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I need to encourage some of the voices that are always heard to not be heard as much, to center the other voices, right? These are things that you can do. And it's also important for people of color to have their own spaces too. Because again, most of the spaces that we're maneuvering in, whether it's work, school, are not, that skillful facilitation of creating a brave space is not happening.
Right. We're at the end of our time, and I want to keep talking to you forever and ever and ever.
It's already been like an hour.
That's really keep talking to me. I would, but what I want to find out, I'm just like spellbound and like captivated by everything that you're saying. And I'm like, you just make it sound so easy. It's like, why? Of course it's like, shut up. So what if it's uncomfortable? Like, and you didn't say shut up. You weren't being rude, but like, yeah, so what? Like, deal with it, And I'm like, hey, it's uncomfortable, and like, come and I'll help you. And it's just like, no, just be uncomfortable. Face that. That's your tool. That's, it's the,
that's right.
That's what expands our consciousness is discomfort, and people shy away from that so much. And you
right.
just,
And you miss the opportunity to grow, right? That's it. It's like, do you want to just live a small half life, or do you want to grow and live a fully expressed life, right? That's what you're missing out. And that's that. Do it for, even if it's just for you, just like be, like, let's all just be our biggest, most fullest, most expressed versions of ourselves. Like, why not? And and thank you for the time, and for like leaning into a conversation that might have brought up some unpleasantness, and holding it, right? And I, again, like I hope that this conversation is the kind of conversation that people like hear, and then there's something that they get that helps them shift, right, to dismantle these systems and this social construct of race. That's the hope. That's the goal, right? It's like we can sit here and talk forever, but like if we're not using this conversation as a catalyst for change, then what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think I just did finish How to Be an Anti-Racist, and he says you're not an activist unless you're making policy. Like, educating people has been shown to not help. I agree with him. I hear what he's saying, and I also do think that education has to be a part of it, because you're not, if someone hears this and is like, oh my God, and then they go vote differently, or they go pay more attention to things differently, or talk to people differently. I think there's different levels of being in the world in a better way, and being in the world in a more conscious way, expanded way, to allow for the expansion of other people. And so I think that it doesn't end with this at all, but this is a beginning, hopefully, for some people, or a second step, or a fifth step, to then go out into the world and like speak up at your damn yoga studio if there's a ridiculous sign, and don't be scared to like learn from my hesitance and my ridiculousness, to then just speak up. I mean, I've definitely spoken up in my fair share of times, like for whatever, but there's been times where I haven't, and just do it.
Yeah.
All you're doing is, I love, what did you say? Every time you step into your discomfort, I've been taking notes. Every time you step into your discomfort, you're creating space and breath for someone else to feel comfort. Do you know who said that? Can I quote you, or is that someone else?
I definitely didn't say it exactly the way that I heard it. Like that's not a direct quote, but it's a sentiment that I think a lot of facilitators around this kind of work have to remind people of. Like, particularly white people, who the privilege that you have is to, like there's this, notion of like comfort, like you have a right to it, but nobody else gets that right. Right. So, it is something, I don't know who said it originally. Like, I wish I did, but like, it's definitely something that, it just makes sense, right? Like, it's just a truism, I would say. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I don't have like an exact name.
No, it's fine. I just want to make sure I'm attributing it. I'm going to attribute it to you. And people listening will know that we did our best. So here's this. How do people find you? I know you're starting a 4-week training program. It's for people of color, from what I understand, but white people can donate to it. You're running a sequence of yoga teachers.
Yes, I am doing a workshop on Sunday with Liberated Moves. And we're donating the proceeds to some of the many different social justice. We have a different one for each class, but there's a number of organizations that the proceeds for that are going to go to, as well as the facilitators themselves. I have a bunch of online courses that are going to be up soon. I do have a YouTube channel that I created during the pandemic. I started it so that just as a free resource for people who, might be new to yoga, or who are like quarantined with their kids for the first time, and like for a long time, and they just need tools to help discharge the stress of that. And but I had a lot of my friends and my friends' families and the students I work with and their families and their parents in mind. I feel I have a lot of events coming up that are like online, which I'll post about. You can follow me on Instagram. C McCreary Yoga is my handle. But I do work full-time at a school, so a lot of the extracurricular programming that I had has again been canceled, the live stuff. So those are a start for sure. I lead trainings that, again, we're supposed to be live. You'll see. If you follow me, you'll see. You can also subscribe to my newsletter. I always share those things in my newsletter as well at crystalmccrearyyoga.com.
Okay, I'll put all those in the show notes.
Okay.
Yeah, so all of you can start to follow her. I just like everything you say, I'm just like, yes. That is a truism. Like that is just yes, agree with all of it. All right, so we'll put all that on there. Liberated moves. White people this is a space to help Black people heal. So white people aren't registering for this, but white people can donate to support the teachers and to support the organizations that you're donating to.
Yeah, a few people have reached out. Like a lot of us as facilitators of healing modalities have reached out to those of us of color and said, how can we help? How can we support? So this is like one offering that was created to help funnel some of that philanthropic spirit, that spirit of like, let's support our, people of color, brothers and sisters to heal. So it's just one of many. And thank you for mentioning it, because it is a big help. Yeah.
Wonderful. And it, like that can be ongoing donations. Like it doesn't have to be within the week or anything like that, I'm assuming.
Yep, that's right.
Great. And okay, so we know how to find you, all your programs. Thank you again a million times over. Can you leave us with one message for people listening? My audience tends to be more white, so it can be towards white people. It can be towards everybody.
Yeah. I definitely feel like my purpose in the work that I do, whether it's in a school setting, whether it's on a retreat,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's in a training, whether it's in a nonprofit or a corporation, this work is about remembering who we are, right? Living in this world, right? It takes away our capacity to remember that we are love, right? I'm not gonna say we're light. That's I'm gonna say we're love and light, but we are love. Like we are beings of love. And there's so much that prevents us from being that. And it's time to remember this work, this dismantling of racism, this dismantling of all the inequitable systemic forms of oppression that there are, because there are many.
So many, yeah.
It's time to get to eradicate them, so we can all be who we actually are. It's time to get free.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to wake up. It's time to wake up and get free. So that's my final message.
All right.
That's it.
I won't even speak. Thank you. You are amazing. Thank you so much.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.